Good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is my weekly internet show on September 30th. Nice to be back with you all. We start our College Civil Liberties Tour, Part 2, in about 10 days. We're heading on out to the West Coast, starting out at the University of Seattle, going down to the University of California, Davis, down to San Diego, University of California, San Diego, University of Arizona at Tucson, and then we wrap everything up at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And I got to tell you, I'm really psyched about this tour. The first one we did last winter, we took us to, Columbia University in New York, and we went out to Purdue, Indiana universities, Middle Tennessee State University, and Ohio State, and it was just fantastic. And I want to thank those of you that helped us out in subsidizing and funding this tour. As you can imagine, it's not very cheap. We've got, let's see, 3 speakers plus a moderator. So we got all the hotels and so forth and flights, and we've got we're taking our videographer with us because last time, there were some people that were having trouble with the live streaming, and some of the college students were doing it, and they were having trouble apparently. But this time we're taking the videographer so that you're going to have really fantastic live streaming. This is the guy that does our Economic Liberty lecture series. We'll have the live streaming and then, of course, archived on the site. And we've got Glenn Greenwald coming back, Bruce Fein, myself, Jack Hunter will be moderating the program. Our program director, Bart Frazier, is putting the whole thing together. He'll be there handling all the logistics and so forth. If you're in these areas, I would invite you to come join us. They're open to the public. It would be nice to have libertarians, and especially FFF libertarians there to interact with these kids. It'll be predominantly students. We're doing this in partnership with the Young Americans for Liberty, fantastic organization. They're, putting the thing together on each of the college venues, marketing it there on the college campuses. And so, granted, there's going to be a lot more students there, but that would be great to have you guys come and interact with them. We before the event, and then after the event, there's always a social hour where we go and interact with the students and so forth. And we're sure to have a diverse group of students there. Why? Well, because of the diverse range of speakers we've got. We've got Glenn Greenwald, who, as most of you know, is a ardent liberal. He was a regular blogger at salon.com. Forbes magazine listed him as one of the top 25 most influential liberal commentators in the new U.S. media. And now he moved over to The Guardian, where he blogs regularly there. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think there's anybody that is putting out better commentary on the war on terrorism, civil liberties, and the national security, state, and foreign policy than Greenwald. I go to his blog every single day, see what he's writing. There's nobody, especially in the liberal movement. The liberals caved in like the conservatives did after Bush got into office. They started, endorsing everything that he was doing in terms of foreign policy, civil liberties, and everything, because he was their man. And liberals were very, quote, principled when Bush was in office, ardent defenders of civil liberties and so forth. But once Obama got into office and started doing the same sorts of things that Bush was doing, liberals caved in. And they did the same thing that the conservatives did, that their man was in power, and so they were going to start, supporting out of loyalty, political loyalty, everything that he was doing. So the liberals started endorsing the very policies that they had been condemning when it was George W. Bush that was doing the actions. Well, Greenwald hasn't been among those, and there's been others that have not been among those. The ACLU has been fantastic in this area. But most liberals caved. I mean, we used to link to articles by liberals during the Bush days on civil liberties and stuff. We can't link to them anymore because they're so horrible, because they embrace everything that Obama's doing because he's a liberal, he's a Democrat. But not so with Greenwald. I mean, we've received, questions about why do you have a liberal on your panel? Well, it's very easy, because this is a panel on the critical importance of civil liberties and the war on terrorism and foreign policy and where this country stands today. And There's nobody better writing on this from a libertarian perspective than Greenwald. Now, the same question could be asked, well, what about conservatives? You have a conservative on your panel. You know, why don't you have 3 libertarians? Well, because Bruce Fein, our conservative, there is nobody more eloquent in terms of defending the Constitution, condemning the civil liberties violations that are taking place and have taken place now ever since 9/11, and well, and even before. Torture. I mean, Fein is one of the most eloquent people you will ever find, passionate people. And so it's a real honor to be with these 2 guys. You know, back in 2007, 6 years after 9/11, we organized a huge conference. And we invited liberals, conservatives, and libertarians to speak at it. And we got criticized by, libertarians that said, oh, how come you're having liberals speak there? They didn't, a lot of them didn't criticize us to have conservatives there, which was interesting. There seems to be more of a sympathy with conservatives, although conservatives are among the greatest violators of not only economic liberty, but civil liberties too. But there was this concern about, why are you having liberals there? And we had stout liberals, Daniel Ellsberg and Joanne Mariner from Human Rights Watch, Robert Scheer from Truth Dig, Jonathan Turley. I mean, the list went on, along with our stock of libertarians, and then we had conservatives too. And the reason was very simple, because these liberals that we selected, we watched. I mean, we saw what they were writing. And they were out there in the forefront defending civil liberties in the dark days of liberty, after 9/11. And we go back to those eras, and it's difficult to remember how dark things were for lovers of freedom. I mean, everybody, not everybody, but lots of people were just gravitating to the government. Whatever the government wants to do is fine with us. We're so scared. We're so scared that terrorists are going to come and get us. They're just going to take our lives. They're going to take control of our government. They're going to take control of our public schools. The terrorists are going to be teaching our children in the public schools. They're going to be terrorist school teachers and terrorist administrators, and the terrorists are going to be running the toll booths on the interstate highways. I mean, there was a fear of the terrorists that was just unbelievable. And of course, the government capitalized on this. And this is what we were telling people immediately after 9/11, that this emergency, this is what governments thrive on. That this is when they're going to take away our freedoms. This is when they're going to suspend civil liberties. This is when they're going to do things that people ordinarily wouldn't let them do. And you wouldn't believe the hate mail we got in. I mean, it just flooding of email. Lots of people were canceling their donations to the Future of Freedom Foundation. But we hung in there because we knew this. We knew what governments do. I mean, you can go look at the Egyptian dictatorship, the one that the U.S. government has supported for decades. They have these same emergency powers the dictators there did, and Mubarak did, the military dictatorship, that Bush assumed after 9/11. The power of the military to go seize citizens and everyone else, cart them away to a military dungeon and torture them, execute them after some sort of kangaroo tribunal. Those powers were assumed by the Egyptian military dictatorship after the Sadat assassination, and they were temporary. That's 30 years ago. And those powers have been employed, just like the U.S. government has employed those powers not only against foreigners, but against Americans. In fact, that was one of the principal demands of the protesters in the Mubarak era. Not just get rid of Mubarak. They wanted the lifting of those powers. And of course, the government said, oh, no. We're not going to lift these things. We got an emergency. Oh, okay, yeah, it's 30 years old, the emergency, but there's terrorists in the world, and there's drug dealers in the world, and national security is at stake. And so those powers in that dictatorship still exist. The Hitler regime, remember the terrorist attack, the firebombing of the Reichstag? What was the first thing that Hitler did? He goes to the Reichstag, and he says, please give me emergency powers. And what are those emergency powers? To take people into custody arbitrarily, no arrest warrant, cart them away, torture them, do whatever's necessary to protect national security. And of course, Hitler used two excuses for this. The communist threat, which of course the U.S. used throughout the Cold War, and then the terrorist threat. And the Reichstag voted to give him these emergency powers. And, 10, 12 years later, he was still going back to the Reichstag, if you can imagine that, and asking for an extension of the temporary powers. So look at Chile, okay? Remember the Allende regime that had been, the economy was in chaos, everything was falling apart, and in large part because the CIA had caused it to. I mean, remember Richard Nixon said, "We're not going to have another Castro in this hemisphere. Make that economy scream. Get on in there and do whatever you can to disrupt things." And sure enough, you had this economic emergency. And that's when Pinochet, with the full support of the CIA, the U.S. military, takes over in a military coup, imposes of these emergency powers, the same types of emergency powers that exist in the U.S. today and Egypt today and so forth, the power to take people into custody without arrest warrants, just arbitrarily pick them up, take them away, torture them, execute them, and they did. I mean, they tortured people, they raped people, they disappeared people with the full support of the U.S. And so this is what we were looking at 9/11 as libertarians. We were not unaware of these things, and we said, uh-oh, watch and see what the U.S. does now in response to this emergency. And sure enough, I mean, Bush didn't even go to Congress and ask for these powers. He just said, we have them because we're at war. And everybody knows that at war, a commander-in-chief, a dictator, has these powers. Well, not under our system. Our system, that powers are enumerated in the Constitution. And those powers there don't exist. They're not enumerated. In fact, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments expressly prohibit them. But you see, in that fear-ridden environment, because it was an emergency, it was the terrorists are coming to get us, and politicians know, public officials know, this is the ideal time that you take away people's freedom. And this is what we were saying after 9/11 at the Future of Freedom Foundation. I mean, we were among the few that was out there saying, this is America. And this is not what America's all about. This is why the framers had a constitution, to protect us from these kind of emergency assumptions of power. And now, of course, we were also pointing out that how the 9/11 occurred. You see, because U.S. officials were out there telling Americans, oh, this is because they hate us for our freedom and values. We're just sitting over here minding our own business, and we've got freedom over here and our values, and they just hate us. The terrorists hate us. And of course, underlying all this was the Muslims hate us. It's the Muslims that are doing this. And you saw the conservative supporters and the neocons saying that in the private sector. Government officials wouldn't say that overtly, but you could see the way they were going after later on Muslims, rounding them up, Muslim immigrants, and so forth. They were targeting the Muslims, and they were saying they just hate us for our freedom and values. Well, even before 9/11, we were saying that was nonsense. We were saying, look at what the U.S. government's doing in the Middle East, because that's going to precipitate a terrorist attack on American soil. And, oh, by the way, if it does, they're going to use that as the excuse to take away people's freedom. Well, we weren't the only ones saying it. It really didn't take a rocket scientist to predict it. Because, I mean, you look at our op-eds, our articles before 9/11. But you had terrorist attacks on the USS Cole. The 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. It was no different in principle than the attacks, 8 years later. Same motivation, U.S. foreign policy, what the U.S. government was doing there in the Middle East, especially at the end of the Cold War. I mean, they were over there killing people, humiliating people, abusing people, humiliating people. You had the Persian Gulf intervention, the massacre of the Iraqi people there, the horrible sanctions, the hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children dying from the sanctions. Madeleine Albright, the official ambassador to the United Nations, telling 60 Minutes that the deaths of 500,000 children from the sanctions were worth it. And it was all, of course, with the aim of getting rid of Saddam, a standard regime change operation, and replacing him with a pro-U.S. dictator, like they had done in Iran, like they did in Guatemala, like they do with their foreign policy. Their goal, we can see this in Syria today. We can see it in Iraq. We can see it in Iran. They want to get rid of the dictators that are not part of the empire, loyal, submissive, and put into power the pro-U.S. dictators. I mean, you can see this in Egypt right now. They don't like this new guy, Mohammed Morsi, because he's not submissive. Mubarak at least was submissive. He would do what he was told. And they're angry because they're putting in $1 billion of U.S. taxpayer money there, and they're figuring this buys a submissiveness. And the guy's not being submissive. Now you got people in Congress saying, stop the aid, because he's not being submissive enough. Or you look at Syria, okay? See, they're all mad at Assad, and they want to get rid of him in order to put a pro-U.S. dictator in. But don't forget that they used Assad as part of their rendition torture partnership. I mean, he was once part of the empire. That was when he was a good guy, you see, when he was part of the empire. Or look at the dictatorship in Bahrain. I mean, they just killed another guy there the other day, and the U.S. has its lips sealed. Why? Because that's the home of the Fifth Fleet over there. You know, we're not going to talk about dictators that are part of the empire. And people get angry over these things. You see, I mean, if you help one side out, you help one regime out, you're going to get people angry that are in opposition to that regime, to that dictatorship. You go in and you kill a bunch of people, like in Syria, you're going to get the other side angry at you. And a lot of times they don't distinguish between the U.S. government and the American people. They just go after both. And so this is what we were saying, is that before 9/11, this is what they're doing. They're poking hornets' nests over there. They had lost the official enemy of the national security state, the Soviet Union. People were talking about the so-called peace dividend. We were talking about dismantling the whole national security state. Communism is over. The threat of the Cold War is over. Soviet Union dismantled. Get rid of the CIA. Get rid of the vast military-industrial complex. Close all the overseas bases. Bring the troops home. Discharge them. Close the domestic bases. In other words, restore a constitutional republic to our land. Get rid of this vast military empire, you know, national security state environment. But no, you know, the conservatives won out again. Oh, strong national defense. They said strong national defense. And don't you just love it when they use that word defense? It is so ludicrous. You know what defense is? Defense is what the Swiss government does. The Swiss government and the Swiss people devote themselves to defending their country. Okay, what are they defending from? Well, a possible invasion or a possible attack. But they're so well defended that no one would dare to invade Switzerland. I mean, it'd be like swallowing a porcupine. It'd be that bad. I mean, everybody's got assault rifles in his home. He's ready to go out. They all know how to use them. I mean, it is probably the best defended country in the world, and maybe in history. That's what defense means. But when conservatives say we favor a strong national defense, what they're talking about is the kind of system we have, or the kind of system that the British Empire had, or the Soviet Empire. You know, vast colonies around the world, an empire of bases. That's the way the noted scholar Chalmers Johnson put it. A vast empire of bases, you know, 1,000 military bases all over the world, intervening, interloping, supporting one side or the other, aid to dictatorships, aid to democracies, aid to NGOs, just meddling, and making people mad. And of course, on top of this, you got the drug war. That's killing people, that's abusing people, that's, you know, and now the military's getting more heavily involved in that. They've always been involved in it, but now they're faced with the possibility that they won't have their Afghanistan war to justify their existence. They're getting involved in the drug war, and they're stirring up trouble. I mean, they're going into Asia, and they're stirring up trouble with China, who they call a rival. You know, they've stirred up trouble with Iran, with the sanctions and the embargoes, simply a repeat of Iraq. I mean, you know, you could find a better example of a mirror in foreign policy. You know, WMDs, the Iraqis are coming to get us. They're coming to get us. And well, we see the same thing with Iran. WMDs, the Iranians are coming to get us. That's ludicrous. It's ridiculous. It's how do you keep people all stirred up and excited, and color codes? You know, come to think of it, have you seen the color codes lately? That's kind of interesting. I haven't seen those color codes in quite some time. Wonder why they're not using those anymore. But that's their goal, is to keep people nervous and afraid and excited, because that's the coin of the realm. That's where they can keep these powers. And notice that they've had these powers, the same powers that the Egyptian dictatorship has, that the Chilean dictatorship had, that the German dictatorship had. They still got them. Now the sword is in the sheath, okay, but it can be pulled out at any moment, because the courts, the federal courts, they have done the same thing that the federal courts in Chile did when faced with these kind of powers. They've just bent over and said, we ain't going to get involved. We're not going to interfere with the military. We're not going to interfere with the CIA. When they tell us that national security is at stake, we're going to just defer to their judgment. And so you can't count on the courts to knock these things out. It really is going to depend on an enlightened citizenry that says, this is not what America's all about. I mean, it's been 11 years since 9/11. I mean, it's like in Egypt, you know, those emergency powers have been in there 30 years. In Germany, they were in existence, you know, 10, 12 years after the Reichstag fire. Here we've got them, well, in Pinochet's Chile, they were there, what, 20 years or so? And now we're on 11 going on 12 years. This is ludicrous. This is not what America's all about. And a lot of these college kids, you know, they've grown up in this. I mean, what were they, 9, 10 when 9/11 happened? This is all they've known. They've known this darkness, and they're all taught in their public schools and the universities that this is freedom, that this is what a free society is all about, and that they had better just get used to it. Well, it's not what a free society is all about. And that's our job, like on this College Civil Liberties tour, and why we post these videos online, because this is not what this country was founded on. And we can see that in terms of the vision of our founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution. We can see it expressed in 4 separate amendments. Imagine that, 4 separate amendments protecting the rights of the people against a government that claims the power to take life, liberty, and property without due process of law. And so, you know, why are we having this tour? Because it's so critical. I mean, half of what we do at the Future of Freedom Foundation is those of you who've been with us a long time know, is concentrate on the principles of economic liberty. I mean, that's half the problem facing this country. We all know it, right? I mean, you got the out-of-control spending that goes to both the welfare state and the warfare state and all the regulated society, the drug war and all the economic regulations and stuff. All this stuff's expensive. So they're spending $1 trillion more than what they're bringing in. And they're just adding that extra trillion on to the debt. Now, they used to say, well, you don't need to worry about the debt because we owe it to ourselves. Do you remember that when we were kids? Well, we don't owe it to ourselves. The government owes it to bondholders, many of whom include, or one of whom includes the Chinese Communist dictatorship. They're one of the principal lenders to the U.S. government. And they're demanding to be paid in full. You know, when the U.S. is talking in terms of just debasing the currency, which is what they've done in the past, they just start printing the money to pay off their debts that way. That it's a sophisticated way to default. The Chinese regime says, don't do this to us. Well, we're not going to put up with that. And the way they can always retaliate is to dump the bonds on the market that they have. And there's no telling what kind of monetary chaos that would cause. Would they lose money? Yeah. But they may figure that they lose money less that way than getting it inflated out of existence by the Federal Reserve. And ultimately, the U.S. taxpayers are on the hook for those things. So when people say, oh, well, let's just raise the debt ceiling, we'll just add a little bit more debt, that's affecting you. It's affecting every American because you're the one that's on the hook for this. And that's in large part because of the welfare state. And on one half, you got the warfare state. In the middle, you got all the regulations, the drug wars. I mean, this whole monstrosity of the federal government is obviously very expensive. And we've all seen what expenses do to a government. You know, we know what it did to the British Empire. We know what it did to the Soviet Empire. We can see what it did with Greece and Spain and Italy. And yet, it just keeps going on. I mean, despite the fact that we libertarians are fighting hard, the government just keeps moving in that same direction, spending out the gazoo, borrowing out the gazoo, and really sending us down a very precarious road. And for a long time, people concentrated on the principles of economic liberty. I mean, in our very first year in 1989, well, we started publishing our journal, monthly journal, Freedom Daily, in 1990. We were concentrating mostly on economic liberty, but if you look at our, I think it was a June 1990 issue, it's online at FFF.org, you'll see that we address civil liberties. Maybe it was July, I'm not sure, of 1990. Because we knew the importance of civil liberties. But up to 9/11, it was like an esoteric principle. You know, people wouldn't pay much attention to it. You know, it's just, you know, theoretical, and we knew it wasn't theoretical. But we spent most of our time on economic liberty because economic liberty is essential to liberty. I mean, for people to be free, you got to be able to keep everything you earn, decide what to do with it, decide your own charitable decisions, ingest whatever you want, do whatever you want with your own money. But we knew lurking behind the background was this concept of civil liberties. And actually, they're much more important than economic liberty. Because with economic liberty, there's usually ways you can circumvent government taxes, you know, and deductions and ways like that. And tax credit. You look in the income tax code, you can sometimes figure out ways, mortgage deductions, to pay less taxes, or you can get around regulations and so forth. Not all the time. It's they're going to get you if you violate these things directly. That's why we never propose that sort of thing. But what we always say, people should avoid paying taxes legally, you know, taking advantage of all the deductions and all the tax credits and so forth. But in large part, it's hard to avoid. I mean, you got to pay your taxes, and it funds the welfare state, and they can debase the currency because they control the paper money. So there's no way to escape it, and it's important. There's no question about it. But with civil liberties, what they've done is they have assumed the most powerful power of all dictatorships, the power to simply go out and seize a citizen and cart him away to a concentration camp. I mean, think about it. You know, they can say, let's say I'm a dictator, and I say, okay, look, you can have your right to own guns, you can have the right to keep your money, no income tax, you have a right to speak out, you have a right to publish a newspaper, read whatever you want. Give me one power, the power to arbitrarily go pick up any citizens I want, cart them away to a concentration camp, torture them, and kill them. Would you trade all those for that? That's the most direct power. That's the power that now exists in the U.S. government. And those who say, well, habeas corpus is still there, they've gutted it. The Federal Court of Appeals, they've gutted it. It's effectively no protection at all, not in this war on terrorism environment. So this is why we're taking this tour out west to the college students. Hopefully it'll be another big success, and we can do it again, maybe, you know, in different parts of the country. We're trying to raise the vision of students that this is not a normal society. This is an aberrant society. It's aberrational. That this is not what freedom's all about. And of course, we're relying on our methodology, the power of ideas, that as people start realizing, hey, wow, civil liberties are important. They're critically important. That this is essential to a free society. Then all of a sudden they share it with their friends. They get articles. They, you know, spread them, and then ultimately the idea is spread on like wildfire. And this is how freedom is achieved in a society. It ultimately will manifest itself in the political process, because they won't be able to withstand that critical mass of people that say, we want our freedom. We want you to abandon these powers. We want economic liberty. We want civil liberties. We want to know what it's like to live in a free society. We are Americans. We're entitled to know what it's like to live in a free society. We have a heritage of liberty, both on the economic side and the personal side, the intellectual side, and the civil liberty side. And we have an opportunity to lead the world out of this status morass, both economically and socially and civil liberties wise. We are the ones that can do this. And that's the purpose of this tour, is to keep raising people's vision to the importance of civil liberties. And of course, we're going to be passing out there our Economic Liberty in the Constitution, copies of Future of Freedom, which is now the name of our monthly publication. And so if you're in these areas, I invite you to come. If you haven't sent us a donation to help with the expenses, we'd love to receive it. It's an expensive venture, but it's worth it. It's one of our most important projects that we've ever done in the 22, 23-year history of the Future of Freedom Foundation. That's the show. Thanks so much for listening in, and I'll see you next week. So long.